Now we'll hear from Barbara Blaine. Barbara is founder and president of SNAP, the Survivors Network of Those Abused by Priests. Since 1988, she has reached out to help survivors, expose wrongdoers, and prevent clergy sex crimes and cover-ups. Previously, she worked as a volunteer high school teacher in Jamaica and assisted street children to locate family members, ran a shelter for homeless families in Chicago, and then represented abused and neglected children in juvenile court. She also, in addition to her law degree, holds graduate degrees in social work and theology. And now this is really a treat for me. I've wanted to meet Barbara for a long time, but I know she's so busy, I've always hesitated to call her. So now we'll hear from Barbara Blaine. And she's going to speak, well, she's going to speak on a number of things.
Well, it's truly an honor to be with all of you, and I am so grateful to the committee and everyone who put this event on today, and even more so for inviting me, an outsider, to come and be with you today. So thank you. As I'm thinking about what I had prepared to say today, as we were walking in, I was asked to change the direction somewhat and focus on the legalities. And one of the things that I came to, as I've been reflecting and as I listened to the words of our rabbi, I found it very touching. And it made me recognize and realize that ultimately we are guided and we follow our moral conscience, and that is our primary goal. And I have no doubt that that's what everyone, well, almost everyone tries to follow, certainly in this community. But I think it's really important to recognize that here in the state of Illinois, the lawmakers have worked hard to try to make our laws safer for children. And at the same time, while over the years, our laws have been created in such a way that they protect predators more than the victims. And thankfully, in recent years, that has begun to change. So that in 2003, the laws of Illinois became more stringent upon adults to speak up to try to protect the children. And I am certain that anyone who looks into the eyes or the face of any child, we all would recognize and say, this child is precious. We want the best for this child. And as such, we cannot point to any one child and say, oh, well, we could leave that one at risk, or it'd be okay to leave that one at risk. Obviously, we could never do that. Our hearts wouldn't allow that. And I think if we follow our hearts and keep our focus on the children, that is probably the best barometer to determine how we should behave and what we should do in a very difficult situation. And in the Catholic Church, we have been dealing with this sex abuse issue for decades. And if you watch the news, you have seen this issue on the news so many times, and it does not seem to go away. And believe me, our Catholic Church officials would love to see it go away. And I can tell you that the reason it hasn't gone away is maybe twofold. Number one, it's because the victims keep speaking up. And number two, because the truth has not yet been exposed. And it's beginning to be exposed. And I must say to you that I was extremely grateful for two major events that happened this year in 2011 within the Catholic Church. And I want you to recognize that within the structures of the Catholic Church, the only time that change has come, or that the church officials, the bishops, the heads of the religious congregations have made a decision to try to protect the children or the vulnerable, it's only come from external sources. Now, the U.S. Catholic bishops will admit to approximately 6,000 priests in the United States have molested children in the past, say, 5 decades. Yeah, it makes you shake your head, doesn't it? 6,000. But yeah, they admit to that 6,000. But at the same time, not we believe as, and I must tell you also, I'm a victim. I was sexually abused by the priest in my church, and I want to tell you about that in a minute. But first, I want you to recognize that that those priests have only been able to continue to abuse additional children because someone in a position of power and authority over them enabled them to do so. And so for the first time in 2011, finally, some indictments have come down on those enablers. And this happened in 2 different cities. One is in Philadelphia, back in February. A grand jury investigation ended with indictments, and 4 priests were indicted for abusing children. But one Monsignor was also indicted for endangering children because he had been the person in authority who had transferred a known predator from one parish to another parish without warning the parents. We were very grateful for that moment because we think that those are the true problem. Those are the people who really have the ability to protect the children. Sexual predators we will find everywhere in life. They are in every profession. There is no distinguishing characteristic about a child predator. Unfortunately, they don't wear like some kind of a marking on their forehead. They don't engage in other types of bizarre behavior that would lead you to assume that this will tell us this is a predator. No. In every other area of their life, they are normal individuals, except for this one area when it comes to some type of sexuality. They can't control themselves around vulnerable children. So anyway, we were grateful in our community of survivors that finally the Monsignor in Philadelphia was indicted. At the same time, jump ahead a few months until, well, I guess it didn't happen until just the end of August, the beginning of September, that over in Kansas City, the bishop himself was indicted for endangering the children. Not because he had abused anyone, but because he knew there was abuse going on. He didn't report it to the police, and he didn't do anything to protect the children. Now, from my perspective as one of those victims, that makes me happy that finally someone is trying to hold these enablers accountable. I did tell you I would tell you about my upbringing. I grew up in a traditional conservative Catholic community where our family life evolved around our church. I was one of 8 children. And in our world, priests were on a pedestal. They were closer to God than anyone. And I saw that the teachers in my school all looked up to the priest. All the nuns looked up to the priest. Even my parents sought guidance and looked up to the priest. So when the priest began to take an interest in me, it appeared to be an honor. He told me that he could tell I was closer to God than the other kids. As a vulnerable girl, there was this part of me that felt like I'm trying really hard to be a good girl. I'm trying to follow the scriptures. I'm trying to do what I'm supposed to do. So when this priest kind of noticed, I felt like, oh, good. Maybe it is true. Maybe I can be close to God. And I tried. And it's interesting because I'm one of 8 children, and I have a twin sister. My sister, we grew up in the exact same environment, and she's totally the opposite. She did not try to behave any time that I can recall. But if you notice, this perpetrator did not pick on my twin sister. He chose me. Predators know how to pick their prey. So when that first incident happened, he started saying bizarre things to me, like that I knew that he knew what I was feeling, and he knew that I had the same feelings for him that he had for me, which did not make sense at all. And he began touching me, kissing me, taking clothes off, and my reaction was to totally freeze. In my mind, I was saying, no, stop. No, don't do that. I was screaming, but only in my mind. From my mouth, no words came out. I couldn't speak. And when he was finished, he said, well, during it, I recall him saying, stop shaking. I'm not going to hurt you. And when he finished, he said, it'll never happen again. And at the same time, he told me that I had to go to confession before Mass on Sunday. And in my world, as a 12, 13-year-old, I could not sneak out over to another church to go to confession, which is what he wanted me to do, because I couldn't go to confession to our own church. So I had to make up a story and sneak out and run over to another church and get back home quickly before anybody would notice. And of course they did notice. And then, I got in trouble, and I just thought it was so bizarre that here I am lying to cover up for going to confession. It was so strange, but it made me feel very guilty and dirty and ashamed. And as a child, my grades began to drop. I lost interest in any friends. I can remember sitting in the classroom and thinking that as the teachers were speaking and their mouths would move, and what they said did not go in my ears. And I remember thinking, but this does not explain why Father Warren is doing this to me. And I spent so many hours and hours trying to understand and trying to figure out a way to keep him from doing it tomorrow, or when I'd have to be at an event the next day, how would I keep away from him? And just the anxiety that created in me left me feeling alone and alienated. As a high school student, I hated lunchtime. Now, what high school kid does not like going to lunch break? But I didn't like it. You know why? Because when you go into the cafeteria, you have to sit down to eat your lunch. And I never had anyone to sit with. And it caused me great anxiety now. What am I going to do now? I go and get my tray, and I don't know where I should sit because I think no one likes me. And because I feel so dirty and ashamed because of what the priest is doing. So that colored my whole psyche of who I became. And I think the rabbi addressed the impact of this abuse on a child. So I grew up and somehow made it and got my college degree. And I grew up in Ohio, so I got a job in Chicago. And for me, that was like so cool that I get to move to the big city. And even I can remember how proud I was of the first time I took the L by myself. And I know you all do it every day. You grow up doing that. But when you're from Toledo, Ohio, it's a big deal. So I had made it and moved on with my life. And then as an adult in my job, one sunny summer afternoon, it was quiet in our office, and so I was using that moment to kind of clean up my desk. I had a pile of things, and I came across a newspaper article that talked about priests abusing altar boys. And as I read that article, and I'm reading the paper, my heart starts racing, and I started breathing heavy, and I felt sick, and I didn't know what to do with myself, so I ran to the bathroom, and I kind of washed my face. But I physically became ill over reading that article. And it triggered all these emotions for me. And what I now know, that was an anxiety attack. I didn't know that then. And I started having nightmares. And I would have these flashbacks, not just remembering what Father Warren did to me, but it would be as though I'm reliving it. And I'd have all that, the pain, the hurt, the shame, the guilt, and the pit in the bottom of my stomach. And it would make it difficult to cope. And the other thing is, I'd be at work in the middle of the afternoon, or for no reason at all of a sudden I'd start crying. And I didn't know how to cope with those tears. So I went to counseling, and I learned that what I was coping with was the impact of that sexual abuse that had happened to me as a child. So I mustered all this courage, and I went home to Toledo, and I told my mom and dad. And it was very, very dramatic, as you might imagine. And my mother cried, and they believed me. And my father became angry, not at me, he was angry at the whole situation. And at the end of the conversation, he says, "We're going to have to report this to the bishop and to the provincial." Notice he did not say, "We have to report this to the police." Because in our community, in my life, in my world, we didn't need the police to deal with something like this. We didn't want it to be public. We wouldn't want to shame a priest. He was very well revered, so we kept it quiet. And one of my brothers, I eventually told everyone in my family, and they were all supportive. And one of my brothers, who has, his best friend is an FBI agent, and my brother Gregory said, "We have to report this to the police." And I felt like, no, of course not. We're not going to the police. I don't want anyone to know. And so when we went to the bishop and the provincial, they told us, and this whole provincial council we met with, all men, by the way, for those of you who are women can understand that it'd be a little intimidating to convey all that to the men, but I did it. But anyway, the thing is that the response was that they were going to take care of it, and that it would hurt me if I went to the police. So I didn't do it. And I tell you today, now in 2011, that was back in 1986, and that was a big mistake, because what happened is that those church officials were less than honest with me and with my parents. And in many ways, their response was more devastating to me than dealing with the impact of being raped as a 12 and 13-year-old. The betrayal, to think that they would lie to me and to my mom and dad, was just shocking. And the other thing that was a shock to me is that they really did not care about the other girls or other children that might be abused, and that they thought it was more important to be concerned with Father Warren's reputation, the priesthood, the reputation of the parish and the church. And by then he had been transferred to chaplain at a big Catholic hospital, and they didn't want that to be made public at the hospital. So we were just to keep it quiet. But the reason that I believe that was that betrayal, they had told me I was the first one to come forward. And I learned many years later that was not true. Other girls had been reporting him since 1969. And so for a period of over 4 decades, he was permitted to continue to rape and molest girls. Now, some of the priests I know now, because I've met with victims all across the United States, and actually now over in Europe and from Asia and Africa. And one of the things that we keep seeing is the same pattern. Now, the other thing is that the vast majority of victims do not tell. We don't tell when we're children. We don't tell until we're well into it. Up until the age of 38 to bring a criminal case, but the average, remember, is 42. So we're still not even allowing half of the victims to have their day in court. And then in for the civil cases, the statute of limitations is age 28. So you have to come forward even sooner in the civil court versus the criminal court. But the bottom line is that the church officials claim that I was the first one, and it just was not true. And other girls had been abused, and his response, that response of the church officials, and my agreeing to keep it secret and quiet, allowed Father Warren to abuse children for 7 more years. And now some of those girls have come to me. And I have to tell you, I feel, just heartbroken that when I finally mustered the courage to speak up, that still did not save them. And they continue to abuse more children. And I think that it's really important to recognize that we have to do a balancing in our society. What's more important? The vulnerability of our precious children or the reputation of a grown adult? And when we're balancing and trying to determine it, even if the allegations are true or not true, it's really important to recognize that when we choose the grown adult, think who's on the other side. And I want to propose to you that as horrific as it would be to be falsely accused as an adult, I think it's easier for a grown adult to repair his or her reputation than it is for a child to repair their life if their innocence is shattered. So when we're taking the risk, I believe that the risk has to be on the protection of the children. So I'm really excited and happy to be with you this afternoon, and if I can answer any questions or help in any way, I will do so. Thank you. Okay, just quickly about the mandating reporting. I didn't print out that law ahead of time, and many people who are listed under the Illinois Code of Procedure as to who has to report when they see child abuse, both physical abuse and sexual abuse. And I know that they include doctors and nursing professionals, they include teachers and psychologists and counselors. Interestingly enough, they include the people who work with animals, the veterinarians and those who work in the veterinary shops and shelters for animals. And up until 2003, there was an exemption for religious leaders. But after 2003 in Illinois, the law was changed. So the First Amendment gives us the right in America to believe whatever we want to believe. But it does not give us the right to hurt a child, to rape a child, or to not report when something like that is happening. So we are all, if you're in a position, I think that if you want, I'll look it up and actually I could fax you or email you or get you the information on that list of all those employees who are required to report. But the bottom line is it's that anyone who's in a position of power or authority over children, they're the ones that have to report. Thank you.